All right, so I'm loaded now. I still got 5.5 hours of drive time, and it's after dark. Spooky stuff after dark. Spooky. You spooked out, Emma? Is you spooked out? I don't think she spooked out. So I figured I need to take the load I have now, head on over and scale it out right over here down the road. And I need to then head north. And why not do that while recording a video? Listening to some spooky trucker horror stories. What could be better for the nighttime? What could be better for a nighttime drive than some spooky horror trucker whatever stories? I've listened to a few of these before. They're hit or miss. So we're gonna give this a try. See what it sounds like. Um, See what they're talking about. See if it's any good. See if it's worth possibly listening to more in the future. You know, you can only listen to this kind of stuff after dark, though. It just doesn't hit the same if it's not nighttime outside. So we're gonna go ahead and get to rolling. And me and the Emster has already ate our dinner while we are in the dock. Took a walk. Got a video posted. And fiddled around in my editing software a little bit. Let's go to Big Dash. You guys a better view of what's going on. Seems like it's a bunch of companies kind of rolled up in one, I want to say. Um or rolled up all into one building. Been here before. Today wasn't actually bad. I've been screwed around at this place before. Sat here for up to 6 hours before. I'll say showing up early at this place does you nothing. Like you ain't gonna get nowhere showing up early here. They're just gonna put your butt on the back burner, and that's gonna be that. So while we're driving over to hit the scale, before I start up the spooky YouTube videos, figured I'd do another quick introduction. I'll be doing a lot of these since literally I'm just starting. Nobody knows who I am. I have like nobody subscribed to me. Um and as the, as to be expected when you first start doing this stuff. Nobody knows you're doing it. Like I didn't tell nobody I was doing this stuff. I mean, people knew that I was working on getting some content up and that I wanted to do it, but it's something I'd been stop sign, fuck it, we're rolling it. It's something I've been wanting to do for quite some time. And so I just think that it was one of those things that's just kind of fallen out of people's minds, which is good. Um, I don't want, you know, all my friends and family to subscribe to something that, to be honest with you, they're not gonna watch. Like, this isn't the kind of content they want to see. Let's see. Guess green means go. So let's go and put in my goddamn destination. I don't know how to get out of here. This is yeah, I think it's a flying J. But yeah, we need to head on over to this flying J and um want to go. Let's go ahead and punch that in. Go. I need to scale out my trailer. As I've already said, I kind of repeat myself. But I'll say this. Like, I like getting up early in the morning, getting my day started, get this truck rolling. Like, I enjoy all that. Um, there's something, you know, oh, there's something nice about just getting started early and getting shut down early when possible. Um, why does it stop playing? It's always something. We're not worried about it. As long as it's recording my voice. But there's something nice about getting your day started really like at the before the sun even comes up. And that means you could get the shut down early. But then, because of the kind of trucking I do, I don't have a set schedule. So then there's nights like this where I'll be driving until late. I will be driving until, well, I can drive till 1 a.m. in the morning if I so chose. I don't know if that's what I'm going to do, but I could. And there's a whole other vibe that hits in the middle of the night when you're out here driving. Different feel. Get the music going. Got the some interior cab lights on. You know, the flock of idiots thins out significantly, and I'm gonna need to be able to swing onto the scale. So old boy's gonna have to go ahead and scooch on by. Thank you. Gonna swing on here. Hopefully I'm legal. I don't want to get out and mess with this stuff. This place is always packed. I've only been here like half a dozen times. I try to avoid it at all cost, but it's literally right down the road from my pickup, so you just come do it, you know? Let's see, jump on the app. Okay, where am I at? I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Confirm that. Got salt on my window still. Either salt or that beet juice stuff that they put up down on the interstates. I don't know. Fingers crossed. Come on, speed legal so I could just roll on out of here. Yeah, but this stop over here this time wasn't bad. I was there for maybe 2 hours total. About 2 hours total. Hour and a half, 2 hours. I'd settled in like I was going to be there for a while. App's taking a little bit longer than usual. Come on, Waymaster. Let's go. Oh, here we go. Come on. Boy, it is slow. I don't know why. There we go. Haha, all legal. 32,500 on the drive and 30,240 on the trailer axle. That is good to go. Anybody that's curious, I have 11,760 on the steers. So we are good. Love it. Love it. Love it when things work out. They don't happen too often, but when they do, you gotta love it and say, thank you, Jesus. Get me out of here and get me rolling. would say get me rolling home, but I ain't rolling home. Rolling into the neighborhood of home, but I ain't going home. I'm just grabbing a trailer that they have ready for me. Guess they got preloaded today. I'll be grabbing that tomorrow. And the more miles I could put down, the more hours I could put down today carries over. So the next day, I use less of my drive hours, which means I have more time on my clock. I grab that trailer, I can turn around and head right back south again. Although my drop is not until Monday, and it is Thursday. If my drop is in Fort Worth, Texas, it will not take me till Monday to get to Fort Worth, Texas. Um, but I'd like to get down there and just fucking. I know a truck stop that's not too bad. I'll go over there and sit there um, for uh, for a day and just actually enjoy some time down. Maybe play some video games. Rarely get to play any video games anymore unless I'm home. Play some games maybe, or create some more videos, edit some videos, whatever. We stay entertained, stay busy. Shit. Nope. 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 Well, I thought that was the turn lane, but nope, just for this intersection. It's weird. Some of these intersections, they start the turn lane for the interstate before the second series of lights. That's what I thought I was dealing with, but I wasn't. So, all right. Whatever. No harm, no foul. Hmm. And let's go. All right, I think that we could start the video. That we're about to hit this interstate. Start the video. See if we get spooked out. Spooky trucker stories. Oh, fuck.
The dead stretch of Highway 24 had been my domain for the better part of 15 years. Most truckers avoided it, claiming the route was cursed or just plain eerie, but I didn't mind the isolation. In fact, I welcomed it. The silence gave me time to think, to clear my head from the chaos of the cities I hauled goods between. That's why, when the dispatcher offered me the route again, I jumped on it without hesitation. "You sure, Trent?" Ricky, the dispatcher, asked over the crackling phone line. "Nobody else wants to touch it." "I'm sure," I replied. "It's the only stretch where I can actually get some peace." "All right, but keep your wits about you. There's been talk, you know." "Talk?" "Yeah, missing folks. Truckers who took the route and never checked back in. Locals around those parts say there's something out there." "I'll be fine," I said, shrugging off his words. Ricky was always superstitious. If I listened to every old trucker's tale, I'd never get behind the wheel again. "See you in a couple of days." The route started in the dry, dusty plains of Colorado, a place where the horizon blurred with the sky, and the earth cracked under the relentless sun. I was hauling a load of farm equipment to a town in Nevada no one outside of the state had ever heard of. The drive was supposed to be a straight shot, an easy 2-day run with a stop overnight in a small town called Arivaca, barely a dot on the map. By the time I reached Arivaca, the sun was already dipping below the jagged hills, painting the sky in streaks of burnt orange and deep purple. I pulled into the only truck stop in town, a dusty relic from the 60s that looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since it opened. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, barely spelling out the word diner. Inside, the place was almost empty, save for an old man nursing a cup of coffee at the counter and a waitress who looked like she was carved out of the same granite as the surrounding hills. I ordered a burger and fries, more out of habit than hunger, and took a seat by the window. "Passing through?" the waitress asked as she dropped the plate in front of me. "Yeah," I nodded. "Heading to Nevada." She looked me over, her gaze lingering a bit too long. "You be careful out there," she said in a tone that was half warning, half resignation. "Will do," I replied, offering a polite smile. As I ate, I noticed the old man at the counter was staring at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. When our gazes met, he didn't look away. "You heading out on 24? he asked, his voice a rasp from too many cigarettes or too many years. "Yeah. Why?" He shook his head slowly, as if the answer was too obvious to explain. "Just be careful. Road can be tricky, especially at night." "I've driven it 100 times, I said, trying to sound confident, though his tone was starting to get to me. "Things change," he muttered, turning back to his coffee. I left the diner with a sense of unease, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The warnings from the waitress and the old man were nothing I hadn't heard before, but there was something about the way they spoke, like they knew something I didn't. Back in the truck, I settled in for the night.
The only
The
thing
cab
I've
was
seen
my
is
home away
truckers
from home,
construction.
and I felt safe there. I locked the doors, turned on a small light above the dash, and pulled out a paperback to pass the time until sleep took over. The wind howled outside, rattling the sides of the truck like something was trying to get in, but I ignored it, chalking it up to just another desert night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up with a start. The truck was still, but the uneasy feeling from earlier had returned, gnawing at me. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I looked out the window, but there was nothing to see, just the darkness pressing in on all sides. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I heard it, a soft tapping on the driver's side window. It was too light to be a knock, almost like the sound of fingernails brushing against the glass. My heart began to race, and I grabbed the flashlight from the seat next to me. "Who's there?" I called out, though my voice betrayed more confidence than I felt. The tapping stopped, but no answer came. I shined the flashlight out the window, the beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the vast emptiness of the desert. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but the fear gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I lay back down, pulling the blanket over me like a shield, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the truck, every sigh of the wind made my skin crawl. An hour passed, maybe 2, before I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of that place, to leave the truck stop and the unsettling quiet behind me. I started the engine, the roar of it breaking the silence like a cannon shot. With a quick glance in the mirror, I pulled out of the lot and back onto the highway. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of black under the moonlight. I kept the high beams on, scanning the road ahead for any sign of life. But there was nothing. No cars, no animals, not even a flicker of movement. Just me and the road. I drove for miles, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my bones. But the further I went, the stronger it grew, until I was practically vibrating with tension. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut, but I didn't know what it was. Then in the distance, I saw it. a figure standing in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt as I came to a stop just a few feet away. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the figure, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes that looked like they belonged to another era, and he didn't move as I approached. Just stood there, staring at me, though I couldn't see his eyes. I rolled down the window, my hand hovering over the horn. "Hey, you need help?" I called out, my voice cracking with the strain of fear. The man didn't respond. He just kept staring, his presence a heavy weight in the night air. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to drive, to get the hell out of there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the absurdity of the situation, or maybe it was the way he stood there, so still, like he was waiting for something, and then he moved. Just a step, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. He took another step, and another, each one slow and deliberate, until he was standing right beside the truck. I could see him more clearly now. His face was rough, with a thick beard and deep lines etched into his skin, like he'd spent a lifetime under the harsh sun. But it was his hands that caught my attention, huge, calloused things that looked like they could crush a man's skull without much effort. He reached out, placing one of those hands on the edge of the window, his fingers curling over the metal. My breath caught in my throat as I realized just how strong he was, how easily he could rip the door right off if he wanted to. "Get back!" I yelled, but he didn't flinch. His grip tightened, and I could hear the metal creak under the strain. Panic took over, and I slammed the truck into gear, gunning the engine and pulling away with a lurch. The man stumbled back, but I didn't stop to see if he was all right. I just drove, my heart pounding in my ears. The image of his rough, unyielding hands burned into my mind. For miles, I didn't slow down, not until the lights of another small town came into view. Only then did I let myself breathe, pulling into a gas station and slumping back in the seat, my hands trembling. What the hell had just happened? I stepped out of the truck to stretch my legs and clear my head. The night air was cool, refreshing after the claustrophobic heat inside the cab. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that the man was somehow still following me. As I filled up the tank, I noticed something on the side of the truck. 4 deep grooves, scratched into the metal where the man had gripped it. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to get this delivery done and get out of this god-forsaken stretch of road. But as I pulled out of the gas station, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing at the edge of the lot, watching me drive away. It was the man, I was sure of it, though I couldn't make out his features in the dark. I pushed the truck harder, the engine growling as I sped down the highway. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to put as much distance between me and that man as possible. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The road ahead was long and dark, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Eventually, I reached my destination, a small depot on the outskirts of a town that barely registered on the map. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the desert landscape. I backed the truck into the loading bay and jumped out, eager to be done with this trip. But as I approached the office, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the place was a mess. Papers scattered everywhere, chairs overturned, as if there had been a struggle. My heart raced as I called out, but there was no answer. I found the depot manager in the back, slumped over his desk, a deep gash in his head. The sight of blood pooled on the floor made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to look closer. There, on the edge of the desk, were 4 deep scratches, just like the ones on my truck. I didn't stick around to find out what had happened. I called the authorities, gave my statement, and got the hell out of there. As I drove away, the sun fully risen now, I couldn't help but glance in the rear-view mirror one last time. And there he was, standing in the middle of the road, watching me go.
What do you guys think? Was that spooky? Scared yet? Story 2.
The sky was dark, a deep blue.
You guys scared yet? That one didn't do it for me. I like the more I like more like the paranormal, into the world, apocalyptic type stories. Not all that rolled up into one story, mind you. But like the paranormal stuff fascinates me, always has. You know, like the whole ghost and was that dark-eyed children or black-eyed children or whatever the hell, like urban legend stuff. I like the Cthulhu style horror too, the gothic horror. I think a lot of that's pretty good. Um, and then of course I like the apocalyptic stuff, zombies and end of the world, uh, civilization collapsing. Like that stuff is more realistic. Not the zombie part, but um, the civilization collapsing and one man and his dog and maybe his girl and his kids or something trying to make it through it. That kind of stuff I really like.
That only appears right before dawn. I've driven trucks for nearly 2 decades, and I've seen every color the sky can throw at you. But this time, something felt off. It was just another job, moving a load of timber from northern Idaho down to Wyoming. The roads were empty, as they usually are at this hour, and the trees flanked me on either side, their dark silhouettes a constant companion on this lonely stretch of road. I go by Jeb Wilcox. I've been hauling freight across this country since I could legally drive, but life before that wasn't too pretty. Lost both parents young, shuffled through a few foster homes, and found solace in the open road. That's where I belong, where I feel free. But that night, freedom felt more like isolation, and isolation felt like a trap. The route I was on wasn't one I took often. It cut through a lesser-known pass in the mountains, a shortcut if you knew how to handle the tight turns and steep inclines, the kind of road where a slip of concentration could send you barreling down into the trees below. But I liked the challenge. It kept me sharp. About halfway through the pass, I saw headlights in the distance. It was unusual. This wasn't a route frequented by anyone, unless they were trying to shave off a few hours. The lights were bright, piercing through the dark, growing larger as they approached. My mind told me it was another trucker, someone who knew this road like I did. But as the vehicle got closer, I realized it wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was speeding up. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The oncoming truck was an old model, probably from the 70s, its rusted body barely held together by mismatched parts. The driver's face was obscured in shadow, but I could see his outline, tall, broad shoulders, sitting bolt upright. He was driving on the wrong side of the road, straight at me. I laid on the horn, trying to get his attention, but he didn't flinch. At the last second, I swerved to the right, the edge of my tires skidding against gravel as the truck flew past me. For a moment, everything was still, and I was left with nothing but the sound of my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then, in my mirror, I saw the truck make a hard U-turn. My stomach dropped. He was following me. I pushed my rig harder than I ever had, the engine roaring as I sped down the mountain pass. But no matter how fast I went, those headlights stayed close, unwavering. They didn't waver because whoever was driving knew these roads as well as I did, maybe better. Adrenaline surged through me, and I took the curves tighter, not caring if the load shifted dangerously in the back. It didn't matter if I lost the timber, it only mattered that I lost him. But every time I thought I'd gained some ground, He'd appear again, closer and closer. Finally, I reached a straight stretch, one of the few on this godforsaken route. I pushed the pedal to the floor, feeling the truck shudder under the strain. The trees blurred into dark smears on either side, the headlights still behind me, a relentless predator. Up ahead, I saw the faint glow of a gas station's lights. It was one of those 24-hour joints that serviced truckers on long hauls, the kind of place that offered stale coffee and greasy burgers. But it was civilization, and that was what I needed. I barreled into the lot, my tires screeching as I brought the truck to a halt. The old truck pulled in right behind me. I jumped out, leaving the engine running, and ran towards the gas station. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard the heavy boots of the other driver hitting the pavement behind me. The place was nearly empty, just a clerk behind the counter and a couple of long-haul drivers nursing their coffees. The door chimed as I burst in, and the drivers looked up, their tired eyes widening as they took in the panic on my face. "There's a guy following me," I shouted, my voice strained. "He's outside right now." The clerk, a middle-aged man with a paunch, looked at me skeptically. "You sure, buddy? Ain't nobody come in behind you?" I whipped around, expecting to see the man in the doorway, but there was no one there. I could see my truck through the glass, but the old rusted one that had been tailing me was gone. I didn't understand. I was sure he was right behind me. I ran to the door, peering into the darkness, but the night was silent, save for the hum of the neon lights overhead. The drivers exchanged glances, probably thinking I'd lost my mind, but I knew what I'd seen. I paced back and forth, my mind racing. Had he driven off? Was he waiting out there somewhere? The thought of going back out alone made my skin crawl, but I couldn't stay in the gas station forever. I needed to keep moving, finish my route. I forced myself to calm down, bought a cup of the bitter coffee, and walked back outside. My truck was the only one there. No sign of the other vehicle, no sign of the man. I checked my trailer, making sure everything was secure, then climbed back into the cab, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a long moment, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But as I pulled out of the lot and back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow, every movement in the corner of my eye made me jump. My hands were still shaking when I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. The rest of the drive was a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting those headlights to appear again, but they never did. I reached the drop-off point in Wyoming without incident, but I couldn't get the image of that old truck out of my mind. A couple of days later, I found myself on the same route, heading back up to Idaho. Part of me hoped I wouldn't see the truck again, but another part, the part that needed answers, wanted to find it. The night was clear, the moon lighting up the pass in a ghostly glow. I drove slower this time, keeping my eyes peeled for any sign of the rusted truck. And then, I saw it. It was parked on the side of the road, the driver standing next to it, facing the trees. He was tall, taller than I'd thought, with a lean build. He wore an old-fashioned coat, the kind you'd see in black and white movies, and his hair was slicked back. But what struck me was how still he was, like a statue, completely unmoving. I slowed the truck as I approached, my heart pounding. There was something wrong, something deeply unsettling about the way he just stood there. I rolled down my window, the cold air biting at my face. "Hey!" I shouted, but he didn't move. "You need help?" Nothing, not even a twitch. I hesitated, the engine idling. Every instinct told me to drive away, but curiosity got the better of me. I put the truck in park and stepped out, leaving the door open behind me. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet night. I took a few steps toward him, my heart in my throat. "What are you doing out here?" No answer. I was close now, close enough to see the frayed edges of his coat, the way it fluttered slightly in the breeze. And then, slowly, he turned his head. What I saw made my blood run cold. His face, it wasn't right. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too tightly over his bones, like it didn't quite fit. His mouth was twisted into a permanent sneer, the corners pulled up in a way that looked painful, unnatural. But it was his eyes, or the lack of them, that made me stagger back. Where his eyes should have been, there were just empty sockets, dark holes that seemed to suck in all the light around them. Yet somehow, I knew he could see me. I could feel his gaze, heavy and malevolent. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned and ran back to the truck, my legs pumping harder than they ever had. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps slow and deliberate, like he knew I couldn't escape. I dove into the cab, slamming the door shut and gunned the engine. The tires spun on the gravel for a moment before catching, and the truck lurched forward. I didn't look back, couldn't bear to see those empty sockets staring after me. The rest of the drive was a blur, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck on the road. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a motel parking lot and shut off the engine. I sat there for a long time, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't. It was impossible. It shouldn't have been real, but it was. I haven't taken that route since. I don't plan to. I don't know what I saw or what he wanted, but I know I never want to see him again. Some things are better left unexplained, some roads better left untraveled, and that's all there is to it.
Well, I mean, that one was a little better. I'll say this, the guy that reads these stories, he's got a great voice for it. Very good voice for these kind of stories. I've heard some of these read by maybe it's AI, I don't know. But, you know, I used to listen to a lot more short stories and audio books when I was doing deliveries. Um, and there's some people that are cut out for this, and there's just some people who aren't for actually like um, reading this longer form content. Some people have the voice for it. They have their voice draws you in. This is one of them. This guy's voice is easy to listen to. I'll put it that way. It's easy to listen to. It's not distracting. Um, so uh, that I like. Let's see real quick. Let me give him a shout out on his what's the video? Or what's the channel? Gore Gore Creature. So this is a YouTube channel called Gore Creature. It's got 53,000 subscribers. Oh wee boy, let me get to 53,000 subs. That'd be nice. I could do live streams and all that stuff, and actually, like, have a little fucking company while I'm out here. That'd be real nice. Instead of just talking to my dog. Not Emma. Don't take it as an insult. I love talking to you. Uh, it's kind of a one-sided conversation, but you know that's okay. If it ever became a two-sided conversation, I'd probably have to worry. But yeah, it'd be nice to have enough subscribers that I could go live and actually have a rolling chat. That'd be nice. Um, but that's a long ways away. So jump into the next story. Oh, and FYI, drivers, truckers, whatever, you got somebody, like, if you're truly terrified, why wouldn't you're driving an 80,000-pound weapon. If it push comes to shove and it comes down to it, what the hell are you running for?
There are two things every trucker knows: the value of a good diner and the importance of keeping your wits about you on the road. For me, the open highway was more than
Now, there are two things that a trucker knows. The two things are this. Nobody knows how to fucking merge into traffic. And every single plan that you make is going to go to shit before the end of the day. Those are the two things you know as a trucker. Don't make any solid plans. And don't expect anybody to be able to merge correctly. Those are the two things that every trucker knows. That and where the clean showers are. So three things a trucker knows. Where to find a good, clean shower. You're going to have to accommodate the idiots that don't know how to merge. And don't make a plan. Or make a flexible plan, a tentative plan. That's your trucker knowledge.
Just a job. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. My name's Frank Wilkes, and I've been driving rigs for over 20 years. I don't have much family left, just a brother in Kansas I talk to once in a while, and a daughter who's too busy with her own life to check in. So, it's just me and the road, and that's how I like it. That's how I used to like it. My usual route takes me up and down the East Coast, but on this particular run, I was assigned to transport a load of farm equipment from upstate New York down to some small town in South Carolina. The company didn't give me much detail, just a location on Route 95 and a time frame. The dispatcher, Jerry, was a no-nonsense kind of guy. "Frank," he said, "get it there on time, and there's a bonus in it for you." I was all about that bonus. Things had been tight lately. Gas prices were up, and the company wasn't covering all the extras like they used to. I figured if I played my cards right, I could maybe take a week off, drive out to Kansas, and see my brother. Maybe even take him to a ball game. So, I loaded up my rig and set off.
Real quick, I'm not going to keep interrupting the stories, but I'm going to call foul. I'm going to call foul. The gas prices are up. Trucks don't run on gas. They just don't. They don't run on gas. Ain't no trucker in the trucking industry gonna say that, oh, I gotta go gas up my rig. You fuel up your rig, you put diesel in it, you don't put gas in it. So this was obvious. This story right here was obviously written by somebody who's not a trucker, which is probably all these stories, to be honest with you.
The first part of the drive was uneventful. I made it through New York, down into Pennsylvania, and was cruising along smoothly. The weather was fine, traffic light, just the way I liked it. But as I got closer to Virginia, things started to get strange. It was around 2 a.m. when I hit a long stretch of Route 95, where the road seemed to stretch on forever. There were no lights, no cars, just me, the asphalt, and the hum of the engine. The kind of quiet that can drive a man mad if he lets it. My eyes were starting to get heavy, so I decided to pull over at the next rest stop. The place was a dump, one of those old roadside stops that had seen better days. The lights flickered and the payphone was cracked. A single rusted-out truck was parked in the far corner. I didn't think much of it. Rest stops at night are eerie places, but they're usually harmless. I parked my rig and headed inside to grab a cup of coffee. The clerk behind the counter was a kid, no older than 20, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Coffee?" I asked. "Over there," he mumbled, gesturing to a corner where a battered coffee pot sat. I poured myself a cup and took a sip. It was terrible, but it would do the trick. As I turned to leave, the kid finally spoke up. "Be careful out there," he said, his voice flat, almost robotic. I nodded, not thinking much of it, and headed back to my truck. I had just settled into my seat when I saw him. He was standing about 50 feet from my rig, right in the middle of the road. At first, I thought he was another driver, maybe just stretching his legs. But there was something off about him. He was tall, probably about 6'5", and built like a linebacker. His clothes were dark, nondescript, a hoodie, jeans, and boots. but it was his stance that caught my attention. He wasn't moving, wasn't shifting his weight, nothing. Just standing there, staring directly at my truck. I don't scare easily, but this guy, there was something about him that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I honked the horn, thinking it would snap him out of whatever daze he was in. No reaction, just that same eerie stillness. I decided to get out, see what the hell his problem was. "Hey buddy, you all right?" I called out, walking toward him. He didn't answer, didn't even flinch. Just stood there, like a statue. As I got closer, I could see his face, or at least where his face should have been. His hoodie was pulled low, and in the darkness, I couldn't make out any features. I was about 10 feet away when I noticed the knife, a long, curved blade glinting in the dim light of my truck's headlights. He was holding it casually down by his side, but the way his fingers gripped the handle, it was clear he knew how to use it. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Just passing through." He still didn't move. I started to back away, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, in a single, fluid motion, he raised the knife and pointed it directly at me. It was a deliberate, calculated gesture, and it sent a chill down my spine. That's when I heard the sound. A faint metallic clink from behind me, near my rig. I turned just in time to see a second man stepping out from behind the trailer. He was shorter, stockier, with a shaved head and a twisted grin on his face. In his hand he held a length of chain, wrapped tightly around his knuckles. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. I was trapped. The first guy, the tall one, started walking toward me, slow and steady. The guy with the chain circled around, blocking my path back to the truck. I was out of options. Without thinking, I lunged toward the guy with the chain. If I was going to make it out of this, I needed to take one of them down. I caught him off guard, slamming into him with all my weight. We went down hard, the chain clattering to the ground. I scrambled to grab it, but he was faster, kicking me in the ribs and sending me sprawling. The tall guy was on me in an instant, driving the knife into my shoulder. Pain exploded through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung wildly, my fist connecting with his jaw. He staggered back, and I took my chance, grabbing the chain and whipping it across his face. He let out a grunt, stumbling backward. I didn't stop, didn't think, just kept swinging. I felt the chain connect with something solid, heard the sickening crunch of bone. The tall guy went down, his knife clattering to the pavement. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I turned and ran, heading straight for the truck. The shorter guy was already on his feet, his face twisted in rage, but I didn't care. I reached the door, yanked it open, and hauled myself inside. I slammed the door shut, locking it just as the short guy reached the side of the truck. He pounded on the window, screaming something I couldn't hear over the roar of the engine. I threw the rig into gear and floored it, the tires screeching as I peeled out of the rest stop. In the rearview mirror, I saw the tall guy getting to his feet, blood streaming down his face. The short guy was still chasing after me, but he didn't stand a chance. I didn't stop, didn't slow down, just kept driving, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I don't know how long I drove before I finally pulled over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. I looked down at my shoulder, where the knife had cut deep, blood soaking through my shirt. I'd need to get it stitched up, but I was alive. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops, when I realized something. There was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere, and it would be hours before I hit another town. I leaned back in the seat, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. What the hell just happened? Who were those guys? And why had they targeted me? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I had a delivery to make, and the sooner I got back on the road, the better. I started the engine again, wincing as the pain in my shoulder flared up. I'd make it to the next town, find a doctor, and report the attack. Maybe the cops would catch those bastards. Maybe not. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I was a trucker, and my job was to keep moving. As I pulled back onto the highway, the darkness swallowed up the rest stop behind me. The miles stretched out ahead, the road endless and empty. But for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a trap, but that's the life of a trucker. You keep moving, keep your head down, and hope you make it to your destination in one piece. I never did see those guys again. I made my delivery, got my shoulder patched up, and took that week off to visit my brother. But sometimes, when I'm out on those long stretches of highway, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, just to make sure there's nothing following me. And then, I keep driving.
Now that is dedication. The man gets assaulted at a gas station, truck stop, whatever, and he still makes his delivery on time. That's dedication. That's the kind of driver you want if you own a truck. If you own a truck company. Obviously, I've never had anything like that happen to me. Thank God. Fingers crossed, nothing like that ever will happen to me. Sounds like a bad scenario. Um, as for driving out east, I've done a little bit of driving out east. I'm usually just north to south, south to north, uh, through the central part. But I've been out east, and I guess Tennessee technically isn't out east, but they have. It's very hard after pretty much 8, 9 o'clock at night to find reliable parking out there. Um, but what they have is they have like these little hollers and like you're going through the mountains and you'll see these little gas stations out in the middle. I mean, there's nothing else around them. There's an exit of the interstate. Little road goes off into the mountains this way. Little road goes off into the mountains that way. And there's a just a little gas station there. It'll have like a couple of neon signs on, and just usually like one tall wood pole with a sodium light on it. The ones that hum real loud. Well, I've parked at those things. They tend to. Excuse me. Excuse me. Oh, here it goes. Excuse me. Oh, we're passing Big Cabin right now. Big Cabin, Oklahoma. So, anyway, I've parked at these gas stations before. Like when I'm running down to Georgia or Florida or something like that. And, the truck stops are all piled up, piled high, just because that's how they work down there. You know, they're not massive truck stops and they just fill up. But either way, neither here nor there. So I've parked at these things before. They're usually, have a kind of a gravel lot around them. So you could kind of like wrap your truck around the back of the building. And, if when they come in the morning, because they're closed, they're almost always closed at night. Um, if they came in the morning and asked me to move or something, I would, but I usually tuck my truck far enough back, usually by the wood line or whatever, and call it a night. And one time when I had parked out there, the place was closed. I got parked. It was probably 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, midnight maybe. And take my dog out. It's quiet summertime. It's quiet. You hear occasional vehicle going down the interstate, and that's it. And then that sodium light humming and buzzing away. And it was eerie. It was creepy. And well, the instance I'm talking about, most of the nights nothing happens. I mean, basically every night nothing happens. But this one night I woke up, little Emma had jumped out of bed and was sitting in the front, kind of like doing like a whine, not a bark or a growl or anything, just a whine. And so I'm calling her, I'm calling her, I'm calling her, and as I'm calling her, I hear something outside the truck, I couldn't really, I was like half asleep. I couldn't really you know, I couldn't really identify it. So I get up, open the curtains, and look out. There's like a meth head or dope fiend or something out by the side of the gas station, tweaking the fuck out, moaning, yelling stuff, and everything else. Just just this random. I mean, I say meth head. I don't know what he was on. He might just been a crazy person. At the time, that's what I thought. Though I was like, oh fuck, it's a meth head. And that's how it is down in rural the rural South. And yeah, he's just over there, just flopping this way and flopping that way, leaning up against the building, and pushing himself off the building and turning and looking this way and looking that way. And fucking, I couldn't understand what he was saying, or I don't even know if he was saying anything. He could have just been fucking yelling random shit. I was like, oh, hell no. I made sure my doors were locked. Grabbed my dog, went back into the back, closed the curtains, and I went back to bed. I mean, what am I going to do about it? I can't drive nowhere. There's nowhere to drive to. I'm out of time. It was like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. Um, so yeah, I went back in the back, closed the curtains up. My ass fell right back to sleep. I was like, well, fuck it. Whatever happens, happens. When I got up in the morning, I just did an extra close look around my truck to make sure nothing had been messed with or tampered with. And it wasn't. There was no crackhead and there was no nothing. I went in and grabbed a cup of coffee from the gas station and went about my way. But that was like the only time. Like when I was listening to the story, that I was thinking about that time that had happened. This was probably 2 years ago now. I was saying about the time that had happened and how it was like it was weird as hell. It wasn't even really until the next day. When the next day rolled around and I'm driving down the road, I was thinking, man, that was some pretty weird shit. But when it was happening in the time, I was just kind of like, okay. And just grabbed my dog, pulled her back in the back, tucked her ass under the blankets, and I fell right back asleep. But yeah, it just made me think about that.
When I picked up my first trucking job with Harlan Transport, I thought it'd be a steady paycheck and a way to clear my mind. I didn't anticipate anything other than long hours on the road, late-night meals at greasy diners, and the occasional chat with other drivers at rest stops. Nothing too dramatic. I'm Aaron Bishop, and I've been driving trucks for about 7 years. I've always liked the solitude and the hum of the engine beneath me. It gave me time to think, to let my mind wander without the constant noise of other people's lives. My route this time was from Louisville to some backwater town in West Virginia, the kind of place you have to squint at the map to find. The load was a bunch of industrial equipment that was supposed to reach a new factory by morning. The dispatcher handed me the assignment like it was any other, and to me it was. But that was before I met him. I hit the road around 6 in the evening, the sun already dipping low. I prefer driving at night. Less traffic, cooler air, fewer distractions. The highway stretched out in front of me like an unrolled ribbon, the kind of road where you can set the cruise control and let your mind drift. The first 100 miles or so passed in a blur, the scenery shifting from suburban sprawl to the dense, looming trees of Appalachia. It was around 11 p.m. when I decided to pull over at a rest stop. The place was nearly deserted. Just one other truck and a couple of beat-up sedans. The flickering lights from the bathroom facility cast an eerie glow over the asphalt, but I'd seen enough truck stops to be used to it. I parked, stepped out, and stretched my legs. The air was thick, the kind that makes you sweat just by standing still. There was a man leaning against the wall near the vending machines. I wouldn't have paid him any mind if it wasn't for the way he stared at me, unblinking as I walked by. He was tall and lanky, his clothes hanging off him like they belonged to someone twice his size. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, but what really caught my eye was his mouth. It was slightly twisted, as if he was permanently smirking or sneering. I couldn't quite tell. His hair was a greasy mess, clinging to his forehead in thin strands. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice gravelly and hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. "No, I'm good. Just stretching my legs," I replied, trying to sound casual, but his gaze didn't waver. It was like he was sizing me up, trying to figure something out. "Long night ahead," he said, almost to himself. "Yeah," I muttered, and with a nod I turned toward the restroom. I didn't want to continue the conversation. Inside, I splashed some water on my face and tried to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't uncommon to meet strange people on the road, but this guy, he had a way of getting under my skin. I took a deep breath, hoping to clear my head, and headed back out to my truck. He was gone when I stepped outside. Good, I thought. No need to prolong that awkwardness. I climbed into my cab, locked the doors out of habit, and started the engine. The rest stoplights faded in my rearview mirror as I merged back onto the highway, the blacktop stretching out before me. The next hour passed in relative peace, just the steady rhythm of the tires on the road. But then, out of nowhere, my CB radio crackled to life. It was odd because I usually kept it on a frequency where I'd only hear relevant chatter. But this wasn't trucker talk. It was static, a garbled mess of sounds that made no sense. I fiddled with the dial, trying to clear it up, but the more I turned, the more distorted it became. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it cut off, leaving the cab in silence. I frowned, thinking it was a malfunction or interference. But then, in the dim glow of the dashboard, I noticed something up ahead, another truck, its taillights flickering like a candle in the wind. The rig was swerving slightly, its driver either distracted or drunk. "Idiot," I muttered, preparing to overtake him. But as I drew closer, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something familiar about that truck. The pattern of the mud splattered on the trailer, the dent in the bumper. It was the same truck I'd seen back at the rest stop. I slowed down, keeping a safe distance, my eyes scanning the cab for any sign of the driver. But the windows were dark and I couldn't see inside. As I pulled alongside it, intending to get ahead, the truck suddenly jerked into my lane, forcing me to swerve onto the shoulder. My heart pounded as I fought to control the wheel, my rig skidding dangerously close to the guardrail. "What the hell?" I shouted, my hands gripping the wheel. I glanced into my side mirror, expecting to see the truck barrel past me, but it was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. I slammed on the brakes, my truck lurching to a stop. I looked around, half expecting the truck to come at me from another angle, but the highway was empty. Just the dark road ahead and the trees looming on either side. I sat there for a minute, trying to calm my breathing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the long hours and the strange encounter at the rest stop were messing with my head. I needed to keep moving, to make the delivery on time. I took a deep breath, put the truck in gear, and got back on the road, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting that truck to reappear. The minutes dragged on and the road seemed to stretch forever. Then, about 20 miles later, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. Debris, a broken wooden crate, and an overturned motorcycle. I slowed down, squinting into the darkness. The bike was mangled, the kind of wreck you don't walk away from. I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight, stepping out into the cool night air. The beam of light danced over the twisted metal, and as I moved closer, I saw it, a body lying just off the road, face down in the dirt. "Jesus," I whispered, my stomach turning. I approached cautiously, shining the light on the figure. It was a man, his limbs contorted in unnatural angles, his helmet shattered beside him. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I checked for a pulse, but I knew it was futile. The man was dead, his skin already cooling. And then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The man's clothes. They were the same ones worn by the guy from the rest stop. That oversized jacket, those baggy jeans. It was him. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood up, stumbling back towards my truck. How the hell had he gotten here? How was it possible? My mind raced with questions, none of them with answers I liked. I needed to get out of here, needed to report this to the police. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as I climbed back into my cab. But before I could hit send, I froze. There was someone standing in front of my truck, illuminated by the headlights. It was him, the same man staring at me with that twisted smirk on his face. No way, I muttered, my hand tightening around the phone. He didn't move, just stood there, as if daring me to do something. My mind screamed at me to drive, to run him over if I had to, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was paralyzed, locked in a staring contest with something I couldn't understand. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he started walking towards me, his steps slow and deliberate. I felt a scream building in my throat, but it wouldn't come out. I was trapped, like a mouse under the gaze of a cat. He reached the front of the truck and climbed up onto the hood, his face now inches from the windshield. I could see the details now. The cracked lips, the bruised skin, the way his mouth seemed to stretch impossibly wide. And then, with a single swift motion, he slammed his hand against the glass, cracking it like a spider web. That was enough to snap me out of my trance. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine roaring to life. The truck lurched forward, throwing him off the hood and onto the asphalt. I didn't stop to check if he was still there. I just drove, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my mind a whirl of fear and adrenaline. The highway blurred past me as I sped through the night, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of a small town, where I finally pulled over at a gas station. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking as I tried to steady myself. Inside, I found the clerk, a young guy who looked half asleep behind the counter. I didn't bother with explanations. I just asked him to call the police, to report the accident and the man on the road. "They'll be here soon," the clerk said, eyeing me with a mix of concern and suspicion. I nodded, leaning against the counter, my heart still racing. But as I waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the man wasn't done with me yet. The police arrived within minutes, taking my statement and heading out to the scene. They found the motorcycle, the debris, but there was no sign of the man, just the bloodstains on the road and the broken glass from my windshield. "Are you sure about what you saw?" one of the officers asked, his tone skeptical. I nodded, too tired to argue. They didn't push it, just told me to get some rest and be careful on the road. I got back into my truck, the feeling of dread still gnawing at me. As I drove away, the town fading into the distance, I couldn't help but glance at the mirrors, half expecting to see that twisted smirk staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out ahead. And then, as if nothing had happened, the radio crackled to life again, this time with a clear signal. Some old country song, one I didn't recognize, played softly through the speakers. It was almost comforting. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and kept driving, the road ahead of me long and empty, but somehow less threatening. Just another night on the job.
Well, I think driver that you have probably reached a point of exhaustion where you are doomed. That's what that sounds like. Said the cops looked at him skeptically. Yeah, I think the cops would have a few more questions for you if you're reporting all this stuff and there ain't nothing there. I think they're gonna assume a few things. You're gonna have some questions to answer. It's like I've heard of a legend of a black dog or something like that. Truckers talk about a black dog. Like it, I have to look that up a little bit more. Maybe I'll make a video about that. Um, 'Cause I don't know a lot about it. Um, but there's like a trucker legend about a black dog seeing a black dog. Yeah, that might make a good video. I'll have to look up and see if there's anything on that. Maybe a short video on it that I can react to.
I hate driving at night. Most truckers I know love it because the roads are clearer, and you can cover more ground without getting caught in traffic. But not me. I've had my share of weird, creepy experiences on the road, and something about the darkness just feels wrong. Maybe it's because you can't see what's ahead of you, or what's hiding in the shadows until it's too late. My name's Clyde Merrill. I've been driving trucks for nearly 20 years, hauling everything from produce to heavy machinery. It's a tough job, but it pays the bills, and it's given me a chance to see parts of the country I'd never have visited otherwise. Tonight, I was making my way through the dense forests of northern Maine, driving a route that was supposed to be an easy one. A straight shot through miles of pine trees and two-lane highways that see maybe a handful of cars each hour. The place felt like the edge of the world. It was a stretch of road where the radio signal died, and the only company you had was the occasional deer or fox darting across the road. I was supposed to drop off a load of timber at a small lumberyard in Caribou, but I'd started out later than planned, which meant I'd be driving through the night. I was about 2 hours from my destination, the road barely visible in my headlights, when I saw it. A massive figure sprawled across the road up ahead. At first, I thought it was a moose, which wasn't uncommon around these parts. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It was a man lying flat on his back, one arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his legs spread out like he'd been thrown there by something much larger. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the rig to a screeching halt just a few feet away from the body. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea. The guy looked like he'd been through hell, his clothes torn, his skin pale, and there was blood, a lot of it, pooling around his head. I jumped out of the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel as I ran over to him. My first thought was to check for a pulse, see if the guy was still alive, but as soon as I got close, I knew he was dead. His face was battered, one eye swollen shut, and his mouth hung open, a line of blood trickling from the corner. What the hell happened out here? I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. There was no signal. I cursed under my breath, pocketed the phone, and looked around, trying to figure out what to do next. The road was deserted, the trees on either side thick and imposing, like a wall of darkness closing in on me. There wasn't a house or a gas station for miles, and I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. I glanced back at the body, and that's when I noticed the drag marks. They were faint but visible, a trail leading from the woods to the road where the man lay. It was as if something had pulled him out of the trees and dropped him there, right in the path of oncoming traffic. A chill ran down my spine as I followed the marks with my eyes, trying to see where they led. The trail disappeared into the darkness, the trees swallowing it up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there watching me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I needed to think. There was a dead guy on the road, and I had no way of calling for help. My truck wasn't going anywhere with a corpse in front of it, and there was no way in hell I was going to drag the body off the road myself. I'd seen enough horror movies to know that's how you end up as the next victim. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and grabbed my flashlight. If I couldn't call for help, maybe I could signal someone, another trucker, a state trooper, anyone who might be passing by. I flicked the switch on the flashlight, and it sputtered to life, casting a weak beam of light onto the road. I held the flashlight out the window, waving it back and forth, hoping it would catch someone's attention. But as I sat there, scanning the darkness, I realized how alone I really was. There was no one else out here. Just me, the dead guy, and whatever had dragged him out of the woods. Minutes passed, and my anxiety grew with each one. The flashlight's beam flickered, then dimmed, and I cursed as it finally gave out. The battery was dead. I tossed it onto the passenger seat and rubbed my face, trying to figure out what to do next. Then I heard it. A rustling sound coming from the trees. It was faint, like the wind brushing through the branches, but it was enough to make me tense up. I peered into the darkness, straining to see what was out there, but all I saw were shadows. My pulse quickened, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon, or maybe it was something else. The rustling grew louder, closer, and I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever it was to come for me. I needed to get out of there, and fast. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. The truck's headlights illuminated the road, the body still lying there in front of me. I hesitated for a moment, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. I didn't want to run over the guy, but I also didn't want to stick around to see what had killed him. Before I could make up my mind, the rustling stopped. Everything went still. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the pounding of my own heart. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. A figure stepped out of the trees, slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dirty, torn jacket and jeans. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see that his hands were smeared with blood, the same blood that stained the body on the road. I stared at him, my mind racing. There was no way this guy was just a random passerby. He was connected to the dead man somehow, and he was coming straight for me. I floored the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward. The man didn't move, didn't even flinch as the truck bore down on him. At the last second, I swerved, the tires screeching as I veered around the body and the man. I didn't look back to see if he was still standing there. I just kept driving, my heart pounding, the road blurring beneath me as I sped away. I drove for what felt like hours, not slowing down until I saw the lights of a small diner up ahead. It was the first sign of civilization I'd seen since I'd left the lumberyard. I pulled into the parking lot, my hands shaking as I shut off the engine. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I needed to tell someone what had happened, but who? And would they even believe me? I grabbed my phone again, praying for a signal. This time, it worked. I dialed 911, my heart pounding in my chest as the phone rang. A dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what I'd seen. The dead man on the road, the figure that had emerged from the woods. The dispatcher listened quietly, then asked for my location. I gave it to her, and she assured me that help was on the way. But there was something in her voice, a hint of disbelief, like she wasn't sure if I was telling the truth or just another trucker with a wild imagination. I stayed in the truck, watching the road, waiting for the flashing lights of a police car. It didn't take long. A squad car pulled up a few minutes later, followed by an ambulance. The officers got out, their faces stern as they approached my truck. I told them everything, just like I told the dispatcher. They listened, nodding, but I could tell they didn't quite believe me. They asked me to lead them back to the spot where I'd found the body, and reluctantly I agreed. We drove back down the dark road, the squad car following close behind. I kept my eyes on the trees, half expecting the man to step out again. But there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of road and the darkness pressing in on all sides. When we reached the spot, I slowed down, my heart sinking as I realized what was missing. The body was gone. The road was empty, no sign of the man, the drag marks, or anything else I'd seen earlier. The officers looked at me, their expressions a mix of confusion and suspicion. They asked me to step out of the truck, to retrace my steps. But there was nothing. No blood, no tracks. Nothing to prove what I'd seen. They searched the area, combing the woods with flashlights, but came up empty-handed. After a while, they called off the search, deciding it must have been a false alarm. They offered me a ride back to town, but I declined. I didn't want to leave my truck behind, not out here. As the officers drove away, I stood there by the side of the road, staring into the darkness. I knew what I'd seen. There was no way I could have imagined it. But without any evidence, without the body, no one would ever believe me. I climbed back into the truck, my mind racing with questions. Who was that man? And why had he taken the body? As I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just brushed up against something dark, something I wasn't supposed to see. And whatever it was, I knew it was still out there.
Seems like these stories have like, for one, when the voice or when it's read off as 911, makes me think that this is probably an AI voiceover thing, like text to speech AI voice. Um, because who the hell says nine? Oh, I dialed 911. Like nobody says that. And it's like all these stories kind of have the same theme. Like I'm driving down the road, there's a body. Driving down the road, there's an accident, there's the body. I call the cops. The cops are skeptical of my story. Seems like all these stories are sharing that same theme, which makes me wonder: did Chat GPT write these stories? Like, are these even written by a person? Because how are they all so similar?
Truck driving has always been in my blood. My father did it, my grandfather too, and now, here I am, a third-generation road warrior. There's something about the open road, the hum of the engine beneath me, and the miles slipping by like a well-worn path that always drew.
A road warrior, fellas. I don't feel like a road warrior. I feel like a chump out here fucking driving all these damn miles, working this many hours. Especially when my taxes come due. That's when I feel like I'm the most of a chump.
Drew me in. But if there's one thing I've learned from years behind the wheel, it's that no 2 days are ever the same. That's how it started. A routine haul through backcountry roads that most drivers would avoid. I'm not most drivers. My rig, a beat-up old Peterbilt I'd named Betsy, had seen better days, but she was reliable. We were cutting across a desolate stretch of highway somewhere in northern Nevada, about as middle of nowhere as you could get in this country. No cell service, no signs of life for miles, just the road, the mountains, and the endless desert stretching out in every direction. It was just past midnight, the darkness pressing in around the cab like a suffocating blanket. The road had been empty for hours, the only light coming from Betsy's headlights slicing through the blackness ahead. The radio, tuned to some classic rock station, crackled with static. I didn't mind. The noise was comforting. My thoughts were on the delivery I had to make by dawn, a load of machinery parts to a mining town no one's ever heard of, when I saw him. He was standing on the side of the road, a hitchhiker, or so I thought at first. Tall, lean, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His thumb was out, and I could see his breath in the cool night air. It was a weird place to be hitching a ride, but not the weirdest thing I'd seen on these roads. I slowed Betsy down, debating whether to pull over. There was something off about the guy. Maybe it was the way he was standing, too still, like he was carved out of the landscape. Or maybe it was the way he didn't seem surprised to see a truck coming his way on a road that was usually dead quiet at this hour. But then I figured, hell, maybe he's just another lost soul looking to get somewhere, and I was the only chance he had. I pulled over, the air brakes hissing like a rattlesnake. He didn't move at first, just kept staring at the truck. I leaned over and opened the passenger door. "Where you headed?" I called out. He stepped closer, but he didn't answer. The light from the cab caught his face as he climbed up, and that's when I noticed it. His face was thin, almost gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. His skin was pale, but not sickly. More like he just didn't belong under the harsh sun of the Nevada desert. His eyes, damn, I didn't want to look at them, but there was something in them. Something cold and empty, like a void. I shook it off and told myself I was being paranoid. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in a while. He slid into the seat and shut the door, the sound echoing in the silence. The guy didn't offer a name, and I didn't ask. I just put Betsy back in gear and got us moving again. We rode in silence for a while, just the sound of the engine and the road beneath us. I tried to make small talk, asked him where he was coming from, where he was headed, but he gave me nothing. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his hands clasped together in his lap. The guy had this unsettling presence, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something deeply wrong with him. The road twisted and turned through the mountains, and the longer we drove, the more I started to feel uneasy. I've had my fair share of sketchy passengers before, but this guy was different. There was no anger, no aggression, just a cold emptiness that made my skin crawl. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel his gaze on me, like he was studying me, waiting for something. About an hour in, I decided enough was enough. There was a small rest stop coming up, just a dilapidated old gas station with a flickering neon sign. I figured I'd drop him off there and get on with my night. I didn't care where he was going, as long as he was out of my truck. "We're stopping up ahead," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can catch another ride from here." For the first time since he got in, he turned to look at me. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach knot. "I don't think so," he said quietly. That was it. 2 seconds, and I'd had enough. I pulled Betsy off the road, the tires crunching over gravel as we came to a stop in the rest stop parking lot. The place was deserted, not a soul in sight. Perfect. "You're getting out," I said, more forcefully this time, reaching over to open the passenger door. "Now." But he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at me with those cold, dead eyes. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you really think you can just drop me off?" he asked, his voice soft but menacing. "Like I'm some kind of stray dog?" I felt my pulse quicken. This was bad. Really bad. I had no idea who this guy was, but he wasn't just some hitchhiker. Something told me I'd made a big mistake letting him into my truck. I reached under my seat, where I kept a tire iron for emergencies, and pulled it out, brandishing it like a weapon. I said, "Get out, now." The man's smile widened. He didn't even flinch. "Go ahead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Try it." I didn't think. I just swung. The tire iron connected with his shoulder, and I expected him to crumple, to feel pain, something, but he didn't even budge. Instead, he grabbed the tire iron mid-swing and wrenched it from my hands with impossible strength. My heart pounded as he leaned in closer, his face inches from mine. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice a whisper of steel. "You're not in control here." The fear that had been simmering inside me boiled over. I shoved the door open and jumped out of the truck, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I turned, ready to run, but I heard the door of the truck creak open behind me. He was coming after me. I didn't waste any time. I bolted toward the gas station, hoping against hope that the door was unlocked. My feet pounded the pavement as I reached the entrance, my fingers scrabbling for the handle. It opened, thank God, and I burst inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I turned around, panting, expecting him to be right there. But the parking lot was empty. The truck was still there, the door hanging open, but he was gone. Vanished. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I stayed in that gas station for what felt like hours, crouched behind the counter, my heart racing, waiting for him to come bursting in. But he never did. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, there was no sign of him. I didn't go back to the truck right away. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to get back in Betsy again. But eventually, I had no choice. The delivery had to be made, and I wasn't about to let some psycho ruin my reputation. When I finally climbed back into the cab, everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing. On the passenger seat, where the guy had been sitting, was the tire iron, bent, twisted out of shape, like it had been crushed by a machine. I never saw him again, and I never took that route again. Maybe it was just a fluke, a one-time thing, or maybe I'd crossed paths with someone I was never meant to understand. All I know is, I'm a little more careful about who I pick up on the road these days. And that's the last time I let a hitchhiker into my truck. The sky was dark when I left the warehouse, my rig humming beneath me as I shifted gears and merged onto Route 23. It was just another long-haul delivery, the kind I've been doing for the last 15 years. You'd think.
So you pick up a hitchhiker, you get an eerie feeling out of him. You go to drop him off at a rest area somewhere. He tells you no. You smack him with the tire iron. It does nothing. So you flee. When you come back, you find it twisted up like a pretzel. The tire iron, that is. And you're like, maybe it was just a one-time thing. A one-time thing? What? Maybe I just ran into something I was never meant to run into. Those are some odd conclusions. Coming up on a scale house here. We are going to run dark. That this is a very eager scale house, so I don't want to give them any reason to mess with me by having my cab lights on. So we're gonna run through this nice and dark. We're going to just hope that they don't mess with me. Seen that this flatbedder that was ahead of me. He kept on it. Like he could do about what I can do speed wise. But as we're closing in on this, he wants to keep slowing down, because he wants me to get in front of him. That wasn't gonna happen. Nah, buddy. Want to run real quick and make it hard for me to pass, and then you want to fucking slow all the way down to 60 before we get to the scale house, hoping that I'll jump out ahead of you. Nah. Nah. We are closing in here to Joplin, Missouri. And yeah, the little scale house is open. They are always open. That's the thing about this scale house. They are always open. At least they always got the sign, the open sign on. We're gonna go ahead and pull through. I see the green light in the pass-through lane, but I don't know. I'm not gonna fucking. I don't see anybody else pulling in, but I'm not going to take any chances here. We'll pull through, and yeah, we just gotta pass through. Sweet. This place always has trucks pulled into the back. This little tiny scale house. Just the other day, I was telling the story of this place actually, where I came through here like maybe a month ago. It was a month and a half ago. I had a flatbedder pulled in here with a bunch of cops and everything, K9 units and everything else into that little inspection bay that they got back there. So that's the scale house I was talking about a few days ago on my stories. So we go. Let's hit the cab light back on. Hi, it's me. And this is Joplin, Missouri. The big old Petro. Multiple nights I've stayed there. This Petro. It's actually a pilot that's on the other side of this that you you will snap an axle coming in and out of that place. The potholes are so bad. Do not recommend. Then there's a Love's over here on the southbound side of the interstate that is chock full. Every time I've ever gone here, it's a little tiny Love's. Maybe parking for maybe 10 trucks at the most. Maybe 4 pumps. And let's see here. It's got count up the pumps right now. What is this doing? All right, it's got 6 pumps. What are you doing, dude? Are you gonna fucking go over or not? You fucking stupid motherfucker. I swear to God, like it's a different breed out here now, man. Got us all the way down to 60 because you don't want to just get over. Right. Keep on. You see me sucking down these halls. It's because I got a sore throat. I got a sore throat and a runny nose right now. I'm congested on top of having a runny nose. Um, so that's why you see me sneezing and wiping my nose and eating halls and all that good stuff. It's because I got me a little minor bug over here. Nothing major. But let's get back to the story.
Think by now I'd be used to the silence of the open road, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the thick, muggy air that clung to everything, making it hard to breathe. Maybe it was the worn-out feel of my bones, a reminder of all the miles I've put behind me. My name's Heath Cadwell. I've spent most of my life driving trucks, crossing state lines, and living out of rest stops. It's a lonely job, but it pays the bills. I'm not complaining. There's a certain peace to the road that you can't find anywhere else. But tonight, I was on edge, though I couldn't figure out why. The route took me through back roads in Indiana, a part of the state I rarely see. Small towns that feel like time forgot them. Gas stations that look like they haven't seen a customer in years. The kind of places you drive through but never stop at, unless you're out of options. Around midnight, I started to feel that familiar ache in my lower back, a reminder that I wasn't 30 anymore. I needed to stretch. I spotted a sign for a rest area a few miles up and decided to pull over. It was one of those tiny stops with maybe a vending machine and a couple of toilets, nothing more. I parked my rig and hopped out, stretching my arms above my head. The place was dead silent. Not even a cricket to break the monotony. I walked over to the vending machine, fumbling for change in my pocket when I heard it. A faint crunching of gravel behind me. I turned, expecting to see another trucker pulling in, but there was nothing. Just the lot, empty save for my rig. I shook it off. Maybe the wind had kicked up some loose gravel, or I was just hearing things. I dropped the coins in the machine, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned back against the side of the truck. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to the nothingness, but after a while, I felt it again. This time it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? The hair on the back of your neck stands up and your gut twists. I had that, strong. I straightened up, scanning the shadows around the rest stop. A lone street lamp flickered weakly, casting long, stretched-out shapes across the ground. My eyes landed on a figure standing just at the edge of the light. too far for me to make out any details. "Hey!" I called out. No response. They just stood there, unmoving, staring, or at least I think they were staring. Something about them wasn't right, though. They were too still, like a mannequin someone had propped up for a prank. I took a step closer, squinting to get a better look. The figure shifted slightly, and I realized they were a man, tall, lean, wearing something that looked like old work clothes. Not a trucker, that much was clear. Maybe a drifter or someone passing through, but it didn't feel right. Something about the way he stood there, almost like he was waiting for something.
Whoever wrote these stories, if it was a person, or I don't think it was multiple people. I think if anybody wrote these stories, if there was actually a human that wrote these stories, it was one person. Um, or AI. Apparently, they were terrified of tall, skinny, gaunt, like rough dressed people, like in blue jeans or work clothes or raggedy clothes. Because every single one of the villains or whatever in these stories is like the same dude. If you actually listen to the stories, like it's the same dude. Just something I've noticed.
"Need help or something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond, just stood there still as stone. That's when I saw the glint of something metallic in his hand. It caught the light for just a second, long enough for me to recognize it. A knife. Not some pocket blade either. This thing was long, maybe a foot, glinting in the weak light like it had seen plenty of use. I backed up slowly, moving toward my truck, keeping my eyes on him. My heart was pounding in my chest, the instinct to run screaming at me, but I didn't want to turn my back on this guy. I'd seen enough to know that you never let someone like that out of your sight. When I reached the truck door, I yanked it open and climbed in, slamming it shut behind me. The lock clicked, and I felt a little safer, but my hands were shaking. I threw the truck into gear, and that's when I noticed the man was gone. Just like that. 1 minute he was there, the next, nothing. I cursed under my breath, scanning the lot for any sign of him. Nothing but shadows. I pulled out of the rest stop, checking my mirrors constantly as I sped away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what just happened. Had I imagined it? No. That knife was real. Too real. The road stretched ahead, empty except for my headlights cutting through the dark. I was just beginning to calm down, telling myself I'd put enough distance between me and that rest stop when I saw him again. Standing in the middle of the road, dead ahead, I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the rig came to a halt just a few feet from him. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, that knife glinting.
All right, I'm gonna have to get out and stretch a little bit. My fucking lower back is giving me a little problem. Kind of like the old boy in the story here. Get out, get out and stretch, and walk the poocher real quick. Give her a little bit of leg time. Want some leg time, Emmas? Oh my goodness, it snows here. There's snows here, Emma. You can go outside. Go outside, go potties. Yeah, come on. Yeah. Yes, you gentle. Oh, you're a wild child. You're a wild child. Oh yeah. Big stretchies. Big stretchies. So I'll take a quick break here. I'll just pause the video. Uh, Take a quick little walk, the dog, get my stretch in, and be right back, I guess. Spent quite a few nights at this place, actually, but we ain't stopping here tonight. Put some more miles down. I still got 3 hours and 47 minutes of drive time. I don't have enough to get through St. Louis, about an hour. When I get to the last place, Cuba, Missouri, I have about an hour left on my clock, and that's just, it's not enough time to get through St. Louis. And once you hit St. Louis, there ain't nowhere to pull over. So you gotta either have enough time to get through it or you gotta pull over before it. It's that simple. That's how the math works on that aspect of it. So I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna pause this video. Let's see here. Where's the damn pause? All right, we're back. Walked to Emma. Bought myself a cookie. Feel better. Sometimes you just got to get out of the truck, move your body, you know? All this fucking sitting. It's all the sitting that gets you. This is the least physically active job I've ever had in my life. I did car sales at one point, and surprisingly, you're always moving, you're always doing, you know? There's always something to be done on the lot. Like you're always moving. I mean, you're always moving if you're trying to get sales. I hated that job. I didn't at first, but over time, I the constant grind, I think, is what got to me. I was on worked for a couple dealerships, and the last one I ever worked for, I was on nothing but straight commission. And then the economy took a shit in 2008. Basically, like it was a bloodbath. Like you went from making decent money, to making shit like overnight almost. So that happened, and all the fallout that came from that. That's when I told myself, never again will I put myself in a situation that, like, I have to rely on good interest rates and a roaring economy to be successful. So, luckily in trucking, it's a pretty secure um career. But oh, I'm gonna need my earbuds. Come on, little car. Okay, here we go. All right, let's get back into the stories. These aren't the best. These aren't the best little horror stories I've ever heard. But gonna finish them out. Hoping for something better.
Glinting in his hand, eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, locked on me through the windshield. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He started walking toward the truck, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The distance between us closed inch by inch until he was standing right at the hood of the truck. My heart was hammering in my chest, adrenaline coursing through me as I scrambled to think of what to do. Run him over? Get out and face him? Neither option seemed good, but sitting there wasn't an option anymore. I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. I kept my eyes on him, but he just stood there, watching, waiting for me to make a move. The dispatcher answered, but I barely registered her words. "There's a guy," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "On Route 23, he's got a knife and he's just standing there in front of my truck." "What's your exact location?" the dispatcher asked, her tone calm and professional. I'm not sure. Somewhere past the old Pine Creek rest stop. He's not moving." "Stay in your vehicle," she instructed. "I'm sending someone out. Don't engage him." She didn't have to tell me twice. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, my eyes locked on the figure. But something was wrong. His shape seemed to change, like the outline of his body blurred and shifted. One second he was tall and thin, the next he looked bulkier, more imposing. My mind was struggling to keep up with what I was seeing, and then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. One blink, and the road in front of me was empty. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my body sagging against the seat. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking if I was okay. I muttered something, not sure what, and hung up. The road was empty again, but I didn't feel safe. I shifted back into gear and started driving, slower this time, checking the mirrors constantly. By the time the cops showed up, I was already miles away. They found nothing at the rest stop, and I didn't have much to tell them beyond a vague description of the man with the knife. They believed me, though. At least they didn't call me crazy. Maybe they'd heard similar stories before. Hell, for all I know, this guy's been terrorizing drivers for years. I don't know what he wanted or why he targeted me, but I haven't seen him since that night. That doesn't mean I'm not still looking over my shoulder, though. Maybe one day, someone will catch him. I was 4 hours into a 14-hour haul, driving from a small town in Ohio to a warehouse just outside of Kansas City. It's a route I'd done a dozen times before. You get used to the long, flat stretches of road, the drone of the engine, the empty fields that go on for miles. I've been a trucker for 13 years now, ever since my dad taught me how to drive when I was barely out of high school. The job isn't glamorous, but it's honest, and it keeps food on the table. My name's Corbin Lyle, by the way, but most people just call me Corb. There's a lot of downtime on these trips, and you learn to keep yourself entertained. Sometimes I listen to podcasts, sometimes it's music. But today, I just had my thoughts for company. The load was nothing special, crates of auto parts heading west. I figured I'd stop at a truck stop I knew of in Missouri, grab some coffee, maybe shoot the shit with some other drivers before pushing on. It was late afternoon when I hit the back roads. The GPS had me taking a detour due to construction on the highway, leading me through a part of Missouri I'd never seen before. It was rural, real backwoods territory, with fields of corn and soybeans, the occasional dilapidated barn dotting the landscape. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and the whole place had that kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. I was zoning out, thinking about nothing in particular, when I noticed a man standing by the side of the road. He was wearing a faded denim jacket, jeans too loose for his skinny frame, and boots that looked like they'd seen better days. His hair was long, stringy, and a beard covered most of his face. He didn't have a sign, didn't look like he was hitchhiking. He just stood there, staring.
Another one of those skinny, loose jean wearing drifters again. Every story. Every freaking story. This is what happens when you go in blind to one of these story compilations. You don't know what you're gonna get, you know? Sometimes they're bangers. Sometimes they're somebody that's just expressing a fear of skinny guys and jeans.
As I drove past, his eyes following me in the side mirror. I'm not a paranoid guy by any means, but something about him gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I shook it off, telling myself it was just a long day messing with my head. About 20 minutes later, I saw him again. Same denim jacket, same too loose jeans, same boots. He was standing by a tree, arms crossed over his chest, just watching the truck pass by. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty road. My heart was pounding. How the hell had he gotten ahead of me? I hadn't seen any side roads, no other cars, nothing. I threw the truck into reverse and backed up a bit, craning my neck to get a better look at where he'd been standing. But he was gone. Vanished.
Now that would be a hell of a trick. If you had a twin, or if, say you were a twin, one of a pair of twins, or one of a pair of triplets, you all share the same look, the same build, and everything. To put on similar outfits and fuck with some people like this, just down like a few mile stretch of road, just film the reactions. You know, they think that it's the same person somehow getting ahead of them. That'd be a good little prank. That'd be a good little spooky prank to play on people and record what the reactions would be. I know this shit would fucking creep me the hell out. If I'm just like out in the middle of nowhere, just hauling ass, just doing my thing, and I see, you know, well, in this case, some skinny guy in jeans on the side of the road, and he has a distinct look, and then, you know, a mile, 2 miles down the road, I see this dude again. Like that, I mean, it'd throw you for a freaking loop, and like have you, that shit would live in your head for the rest of your life. Like, what did I see? You would be second guessing yourself. So there's a free idea for any of you horror loving twins and triplets out there.
Just like that. I sat there for a moment, listening to the sound of my own breathing, trying to tell myself I wasn't going crazy. Maybe I'd just imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew better. I drove on, the unease settling in my gut like a lead weight. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see him again, but the road stayed empty. Still, the feeling of being watched never left. About an hour later, the rain started coming down in sheets, turning the road slick. The light was fading, and the fields on either side of me were swallowed up by the darkness. That's when I noticed the headlights behind me. They came out of nowhere. One moment, the road was empty. The next, there they were, gaining on me fast. I couldn't make out the vehicle in the rear view, just the blinding glare of the lights cutting through the rain. I figured it was some jackass in a pickup trying to pass, so I moved over to let him by. But he didn't pass. He stayed right on my bumper, tailgating me hard enough that I could feel the rumble of his engine through the frame of my truck. "What the hell?" I muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. I tapped the brakes, hoping to send a message, but the lights just surged closer, practically kissing my back end. My heart was hammering in my chest now, my mind racing. There was no way out here to pull over, no shoulders, just a narrow road with ditches on either side. Suddenly, the lights veered off, disappearing into the cornfield next to me. I could see the tall stalks bending and snapping in the rear view, the vehicle crashing through them like a predator on the hunt. Then the lights were gone, swallowed up by the darkness. I floored it, pushing the truck faster than I probably should have on a road like this. I wasn't about to wait around and see what that guy's next move was. A few miles later, I saw a sign for a rest stop up ahead and decided to pull in. I needed to regroup, calm my nerves, and figure out what the hell was going on. The place was nearly deserted, just a couple of other rigs parked in the lot. I pulled up next to one and cut the engine, taking a few deep breaths to steady myself. I climbed out of the cab and headed for the restroom, hoping to splash some water on my face and clear my head. The rain had let up, but the ground was still wet, puddles reflecting the dim lights from the building. As I reached the door, I glanced back at my truck, and that's when I saw him again. The man in the denim jacket. He was standing at the edge of the lot, half hidden in the shadows. His head was cocked to the side, and though I couldn't make out his face in the dim light, I knew he was staring right at me. I don't scare easily, but this was different. This wasn't some harmless drifter looking for a ride. This was something else. something I couldn't explain. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking as I turned on the faucet. I stayed in that restroom longer than I needed to, splashing cold water on my face and trying to think of what to do next. I wasn't about to let this guy get to me, but I also wasn't about to confront him alone. When I finally stepped back outside, the lot was empty. My truck sat where I'd left it, untouched, and there was no sign of the man in the denim jacket. I walked back to my rig, checking the shadows for any movement, but it was like he'd never been there. I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, grabbing my phone to call the cops. But as I dialed, I hesitated. What was I going to tell them? That some guy in a denim jacket had been following me? That he'd somehow appeared on the road twice without any explanation? I hung up the phone. There was no point. They'd think I was crazy. I was about to start the engine when I saw it. A smear of blood on the side of my truck. It was fresh, glistening in the dim light from the rest stop. My stomach turned. I hadn't hit anything. I was sure of it. I jumped down from the cab, my boots splashing in a puddle as I hurried over to inspect it. The blood was thick, running down from a dent in the metal. My hands shook as I touched it, confirming it was real. And then I heard it, a faint thud from the back of the trailer. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my ears. The trailer doors were closed, but I could see something, a shadow, moving behind them. I reached for the crowbar I kept in the tool compartment, gripping it tightly as I approached. I yanked the doors open, the metal groaning in protest. Inside, stacked crates of auto parts greeted me, just as they had when I'd loaded them that morning. But there was something else, too. A body, crumpled between two of the crates, blood pooling beneath it. It was the man in the denim jacket. His face was twisted in a final, silent scream, his limbs contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I backed away, bile rising in my throat. I wasn't alone anymore. Another trucker had pulled up behind me, a big guy named Robbie I'd met a few times on the road. "Hey, Corb," he called out. "What's going on?" I pointed to the body, still speechless. Robbie's eyes widened as he stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought I saw fear flash across his face. "Christ," he muttered. We called the cops after that. They showed up about an hour later, flashing lights cutting through the dark. They took our statements, asked questions I barely had answers to, and finally loaded the body into the back of a van. The cops didn't believe me at first, not until they saw the blood, the body, the dent in my truck. But once they did, they had more questions than I could answer. All I knew was that the man in the denim jacket was real. His body was there, and I wasn't crazy. As the sun started to rise, I climbed back into my truck, exhausted but alive.
Hold on, that's it? That's it. You got a bloody dented fender and a dead guy in your trailer. The cops were like, "Oh, this doesn't seem right," and just let you go on your way. Like, I don't think there's any world where that works that way. Like, it's just all they did in that story was present a strange scenario with and present like zero conclusions or answers or anything else. And that's not even really a story. That's kind of like just like, what if this strange thing happened, and then just leave it at that? Like, I don't know.
I had been driving rigs for over 20 years, seen a lot of miles, a lot of nights out on desolate highways with nothing but static radio for company. My name's Byron Ziegler, and I'm not one of those guys with a tragic backstory or some romantic notion of the open road. I do it for the money and the freedom, plain and simple. I like the routine, the solitude, and the feel of the big diesel engine rumbling under my feet. It keeps my mind quiet. That's how I found myself out here, on a forgotten highway in the backwoods of Idaho, hauling a load of cement to some remote construction site I didn't care much about. It was a route I'd taken a few times before, but this stretch was different. Off the main road, a detour to save a few hours, which the company said was worth it. The dispatcher, Jeb, had sent me this way before without issue, so I didn't think much of it when I turned off onto a lonely two-lane road with nothing but pine trees and mountains in every direction. The sun had already set behind the mountains when I came across the small town of Harlow Creek, a place I hadn't even noticed the last time I came through. It wasn't on any maps I'd seen, just a few buildings scattered on either side of the road, a gas station, a diner, and maybe a couple of houses in the distance. It had the kind of stillness that makes you wonder if people actually live there. I thought about stopping for a coffee at the diner, but something about the place put me off. It was too quiet. Not a car in sight, no lights on in the windows, not even a flicker of movement inside, just a neon open sign buzzing weakly against the dark glass. I passed it by, figuring I could push through the next few hours without needing to stop. The road twisted through dense forest, and before long, I was deep in the wilderness with no sign of civilization around me. There was an odd tension in the air that I couldn't shake, like the trees were closing in. Or maybe it was just the encroaching night. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 8:42 p.m. I'd make it to the drop point by midnight at this pace, then turn back around for another run. That's when I saw him. It was sudden. I'd come around a sharp bend, and there he was, standing right in the middle of the road facing my truck head on. I slammed on the brakes, and the rig groaned as it skidded to a stop just feet from him. My heart raced as I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to hurt my hands. For a second I thought I'd hit him, but he was just standing there, still as a statue, staring at the truck's headlights. I leaned out of the window and shouted, "Hey buddy, get out of the road." The man didn't move. He looked wrong, even in the dim light. His clothes were torn, filthy, a mix of old jeans and a flannel shirt that might have been red once, but was now stained and dark with dirt or something worse. His hair was long and greasy, hanging in unkempt strands over his face. But it wasn't just his appearance. There was something unnatural about the way he stood there, like he didn't belong. I leaned back into the cab, grabbed my flashlight from the seat beside me and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing on his face. What I saw nearly made me drop the light. His skin was pale, almost chalk white, and scarred in places, like someone had taken a knife to it repeatedly over the years. But that wasn't the worst part. His face. It was off. His features were mismatched, like they had been crudely stitched together from different people, giving him this monstrous patchwork look that made my stomach turn. I honked the horn, thinking that might jolt him out of whatever trance he was in, but it didn't. He stayed there, staring right at me, or at the truck, I couldn't tell. Something about his face looked familiar, though. I couldn't place it, but it gnawed at me like I'd seen him before, or someone who looked like him. The man took a slow step forward. "Get back!" I yelled, my voice trembling in spite of myself. I didn't have a gun on me. I never felt the need for one before. But right then, sitting in that cab, I wished like hell I had something more than a flashlight and a box cutter in the glove compartment. He kept walking, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I felt the urge to throw the rig into reverse, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. Something about the way he moved was hypnotic, unnatural. My breath caught in my throat as he got closer and closer, his mismatched face coming into clearer view. Suddenly, he was at the driver's side door. His hand shot up, smacking the window with an eerie calm. His fingers left bloody smears on the glass. I could see now that his hands were wrapped in bandages, yellowing with age, like an old wound that never healed right. I didn't think. I jammed the truck into gear and floored it. The rig lurched forward with a roar, tires screaming as they gripped the asphalt. I felt the thud as the man's body hit the side of the truck, but I didn't care. I kept going, adrenaline pumping through me like fire, eyes locked on the road ahead. For the next mile, I couldn't stop checking the mirrors, expecting to see him sprinting after me like something out of a nightmare. But there was nothing, just the empty, winding road and the dark woods pressing in on either side. By the time I reached a small clearing where I could pull over, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I killed the engine and sat there in silence, listening to my own ragged breathing, waiting for my heart to slow down. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures, out here in the middle of nowhere. I sat there for a while, trying to get my bearings, trying to convince myself that it was just some vagrant or some messed up guy who had wandered out of Harlow Creek, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. The way he looked, those scars, that face, it was like something out of a bad dream, and that nagging sense of familiarity wouldn't let go. Eventually, I decided to push through the rest of the drive, keeping my eyes peeled for any more signs of trouble. Every shadow on the road seemed to shift. Every movement in the trees set my nerves on edge. But there was nothing. No more mysterious men, no strange encounters. Just the long, lonely stretch of highway ahead of me. I finally made it to the construction site a little after midnight. The foreman, a guy named Travis, came out to meet me. He was a big, burly guy, always with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. "About time you showed up, Byron," he grunted. "What took you so long?" I didn't bother telling him about the guy on the road. What was I going to say? That some scarred-up freak tried to stare me down in the middle of nowhere? Travis wouldn't believe me, and honestly, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I dropped off the load, signed the paperwork, and headed back the way I came. But I didn't take the same route home. I took the long way around, through the main highways, where the lights of civilization felt a little less suffocating. That night, after I'd parked the rig and was heading home in my beat-up pickup, I passed by a diner on the outskirts of town. It was a different one, not the one I'd seen earlier, but something about it caught my eye. There was a missing persons flyer taped to the door. I pulled over, more out of curiosity than anything. The face on the flyer was that of a man who had gone missing a few weeks ago. His name was Ed Baldwin, and the picture showed a smiling man with a neatly trimmed beard and short brown hair. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the resemblance. It was him, the man I'd seen on the road, but different, younger, whole. I stood there for a while, staring at the flyer, my mind racing. I wanted to tell someone, call the cops maybe, but what was I supposed to say? That I'd seen a dead man walking? A man with a face that looked like it had been torn apart and put back together again? I shook my head, got back in my truck, and drove off. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Or maybe there was something more to it. Something I couldn't understand. But I wasn't going back to Harlow Creek, ever. I picked up the job because I needed a change of pace, and honestly, I was tired of working the same route between New York and Boston. Long-haul trucking promised me new scenery, different towns, and a paycheck that didn't look half bad. After a few months on the road, it started to get to me, though. Miles of asphalt, truck stops that all felt the same, and silence that you could practically choke on. So when my dispatcher called me up with a load headed for somewhere off Route 74, out in the middle of some nowhere town in Arkansas, I figured why not? New sights, right? I didn't catch the name of the town at first. It was one of those places that didn't have much of a presence on the map, kind of tucked between a forest and a river that wasn't big enough to matter. But what mattered was that I'd be alone out there. Not that I minded. Solitude can be peaceful when you're used to running between city noise. I threw my gear in the truck, grabbed some coffee, and rolled out of the station just before sunset. I drive a Freightliner. Pretty standard stuff. Nothing flashy, just something that gets the job done. But the engine? It's reliable, smooth, and hums, like it's the only thing that still makes sense on the road. The directions had me off the highway after a few hours, winding through a series of narrow country roads lined with nothing but endless trees. The deeper I went, the darker the road got. By the time I was on the final stretch, the headlights barely pierced through the black. That's when I felt something off. I've been driving long enough to know that gut feeling when something's not right. I chalked it up to nerves, or maybe just the creepiness of being alone in a truck that size, lumbering through nothingness. But it wasn't nerves, not this time. The GPS kept telling me I had about 30 more miles to go. So I focused on the road, trying to tune out the strange tightness in my chest. About 10 miles in, I saw it. There was a man standing by the side of the road. He was too close for comfort, and I thought I might have clipped him if I hadn't swerved. The truck rattled as I corrected the wheel, the trailer shaking behind me. I could see him in the rearview mirror for a split second. Tall, lanky, dressed in dirty overalls like he'd crawled out of some old farmhouse. His skin was pale in that eerie kind of way, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. But I didn't stop. I've heard enough stories from other truckers to know that nothing good comes from picking up strange men on empty roads. Still, something in the way he looked stuck with me, like a tick burrowing under the skin. I shook it off, turned up the radio, and kept going. 20 miles out from my drop-off point, the radio signal cut out. That's when the truck started making noises I'd never heard before. A sort of grinding sound, like something was scraping along the undercarriage. I cursed under my breath, slowed the rig, and pulled over. Now, any trucker will tell you the last thing you want to do is stop in the middle of nowhere at night, but I figured it was better to check under the hood than risk breaking down completely, especially since I didn't want to be stuck here till morning. I grabbed my flashlight, hopped out of the cab, and stepped into the night. The air was thicker than I expected, like there was something heavy hanging in it. My boots crunched against the gravel as I made my way to the front of the truck. Everything seemed fine on the surface. The engine wasn't smoking, no leaks, nothing out of place. But when I crouched down to take a look underneath, my breath caught in my throat. There were scratches, deep ones, running along the bottom of the truck like something had clawed at it. But that didn't make sense. Nothing out here could have caused damage like that. Before I could think it through, I heard a rustling sound behind me. I shot up, heart hammering in my chest, and swung the flashlight around. There he was again. The man. This time he wasn't standing by the road. He was closer, too close in fact. His overalls were covered in dirt and what looked like old, dried blood. He wasn't saying anything, just staring at me, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. His mouth was half open like he was about to say something, but no sound came out. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking in the night air. "You need something?" He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there like some mannequin with dead skin and sunken cheeks. Instinct told me to get back in the truck and slam the door, but curiosity, stupid curiosity, held me there a second longer than I should have. That's when I saw the blade. He was holding a knife, rusted and jagged like something you'd see in a slaughterhouse. Without thinking, I bolted for the cab. I could hear his footsteps pounding behind me, faster than they should have been for a man that size. I scrambled into the truck, slammed the door, and locked it just as he reached the side mirror. His hand slapped against the window, leaving a streak of grime across the glass. I threw the truck in gear, slammed the gas, and didn't look back. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see him running behind me, but there was nothing. For a while, I convinced myself it was over, that I'd gotten away. But the road didn't let up. It twisted and turned like it was trying to trap me, and that feeling in my gut never went away. Just as I was starting to calm down, I saw something in the road ahead. Another figure. Not him, but someone else. A woman this time, lying in the middle of the road. Her limbs were twisted at odd angles, like she'd been hit by a car, or worse. I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop a few feet from her. For a second, I thought she was dead, but then she moved. Barely. I couldn't just leave her there. I knew that. But everything in me screamed not to get out of the truck again. The memory of the man was too fresh. Still, I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and opened the door cautiously, stepping out into the night. As I approached her, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Her breathing was ragged, and when I knelt beside her, I could see her face was bruised and battered. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "He's still here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before I could ask who, I heard it. Footsteps, behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't have time to think. I shot up, grabbed the woman's arm, and dragged her towards the truck. She was lighter than I expected, almost weightless, as if her bones were hollow. I practically tossed her into the passenger seat and jumped in after her. The door hadn't even closed when I saw him again. The same man walking towards us from the edge of the trees, knife still in hand. His face twisted into a grin, a smile that didn't belong on any living person. I floored it, the tires spinning on the gravel before catching and propelling us forward. The truck roared down the road, and I didn't stop until I saw lights in the distance. A small gas station, the only sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. I pulled in, parked the truck, and took a breath for what felt like the first time since it all started. The woman was unconscious beside me, her chest rising and falling shallowly. I grabbed my phone again, called 911, and gave them my location. When the police arrived, they found the woman alive, but barely. She was taken to the hospital, where they said she'd been missing for 3 days. As for the man, when they searched the area where I'd seen him, they found something all right. His body, if you could call it that, was hanging from a tree deep in the woods, long decomposed. But there were no explanations for the fresh knife wounds on the woman or the scratches under my truck.
All right, so would you guys rate that? Tell me in the comments down below. We're gonna do a rating system on these spooky story times. Um, since I've been driving, I've been thinking. I think I'm gonna rate it in Reapers. So, how many Reapers? 5 being the perfect is perfection. And what we got going on here? We got all these people off the road. So 5 Reapers being a perfect series of stories or story. It's a series of stories. They all got to be lumped together. And to be honest with you, like the voiceover is very good. The presentation, the clear cut delineation between the stories, I think is well done. I've listened to these before where all the stories just kind of like bleed together. Like as soon as one ends, the next one will begin. There's no like delay or anything. So I actually like the fact that there's a delay. But just on the actual aspect of the stories, I'm gonna have to give this like a one Reaper. Like not one of these stories was creepy. They they all had the same theme or narrative to them. A skinny guy in jeans, out on like a desolate stretch of the interstate. Uh, it was the same story on repeat, just lightly mixing up the elements of it. So not the greatest. That's no slam against the channel Gore Creature, whether these are his stories or if he's just reading them off Reddit or however that's happening. No slam against him for that. But yeah, I'm gonna give it one Reaper. I can't give it anything more. I give him one because he showed up. and gave me some entertainment. Um, but that's as much as I could do for that. And with that, I'm gonna call it on this particular video. I still have hours to go tonight. Whether I'm gonna drive those hours, I don't know. I'm tired, I'm sick, I ain't really feeling it, but I want to put the miles down. So if you like this video, if you like the fact that I'm trying to do something a little different, um, give me a thumbs up, a like, consider subscribing to the channel, seeing where I go with all this, and comment down below what you think of it. And get, give me a rating. How many Reapers would you give these stories if you hung in there and you listened to them all? I'll link this video in the description below if you'd like to go just see it or check out this guy's channel. He's got a ton of stories or videos. So I would say go over there and check it out if you like this kind of stuff. And with that, peace. Stay safe out there, guys.